Hello, and welcome to Everybody's Business. I'm your host, Valerie Hellerman, and today I am honored to have Sheriff Leo Dutton here to speak about gun control and what's going on in our state of Montana. Welcome, Sheriff Dutton.
Thank you, Valerie. Appreciate you having me here. You're always such a gracious host, and you ask questions that are intriguing, and you don't try to lead the answer, and I appreciate that.
Oh, good. Well, so gun violence in the U.S. just seems out of control these days. And so I wanted to know, in Montana, we have just passed some bills. And so I want to start with what guns are actually legal in Montana right now.
The only gun that's not legal that you have to have a special license for is a fully automatic gun. If it fires in rapid succession by pulling the trigger once and empties the magazine, that you have to have a license for. Other than that, there are no licensing requirements for any weapon.
Okay, and there's no waiting period for purchase?
Yes, there still is a waiting period.
Oh, there is. For how
Yes.
long is that?
It depends on how long it takes to get your background done, and they run a background through the NCIC, National Crime Information Center, and the dealers do that, and they'll run that through there. If you buy it by private sale, there is no requirement for that.
Okay, okay. So this House Bill 102 has now allowed guns to be on college campuses. And how is that going to work? I mean, I know there's places you can't bring it on campus, but how does policing feel about guns on college campuses?
You know, you ask a very good question, and I'm not a campus police officer or anything like that. A good friend of mine, Jason Grimace, is now going to be responsible for that for Carroll College. A couple of things. One, what is, if you go into the psychology of how old you are you responsible? There's pros and cons. The con is that their brain isn't fully developed. They'll develop an emotional response. They'll be inebriated, those kind of things. The pro is that, well, they were old enough to go to the military. They were old enough to give a fully automatic handgun, and they were old enough to give ammunition and train to recognize an adversary. So the development of the brain comes into question. The difference is right here, the training. When you go into the military, you're trained. You receive training on shooting, recognition of who the enemy is, who it's not, and when to shoot, when not to shoot, when the orders to shoot are. On the other side, when you're a young adult and you have a gun, you could stop a mass shooting. I don't argue that at all. But I guess the chapter's yet to be written about the emotional response. I'm angry, I'm impaired somehow. Will that happen? And the proponents argued that it would not. So yes, anytime a gun is involved, that peace officers are concerned about that and ask that, okay, everybody put their guns away. We don't want shot. We don't want you to shoot us. And we don't want to shoot you. I mean, we really don't.
Yeah.
I don't hire people who come and say, well, I can't wait to get my first shooting. I don't. So there's responsible gun owners. I'm dealing with that right now in the North Hills about shooting and practicing and knowing when to shoot and when not to shoot. The North Hills public lands are being shot up by, I would classify it's juvenile behavior irregardless of age.
Yeah.
How is that? So that plays into that. We're a little nervous about it, but we work for the will of the people.
Yeah. So now also guns are also allowed in churches.
Yes.
Unless the church says, is the church allowed to say, no, you can't bring in a gun?
Yes.
Yeah, so any private entity can say, I don't want a gun in my home, or even if I'm renting it to you, or on my property or in my church.
In my church, if I'm renting to you, that gets into an element I'm not real familiar with.
Okay.
I don't think it can apply there because I think you can't set up a rental agreement that conflicts with state law. So rental property would be different than a business, because a business or a private place such as a church, you can say no guns allowed if you want to. A business can say that, a bar can say that, but I'm not versed enough to say, okay, I'm going to rent to you, but no guns in here. That would probably be challenged and overturned.
Okay. So with less gun control in Montana, would you say that we have less gun control?
I would say we have less restrictions
Less.
on where you can have firearms or knives or things like that.
How does that affect policing?
It gives you a heightened sense of awareness. Now you can have a weapon in an establishment that serves alcohol. Even in the Wyatt Earp days, they figured that wasn't such a good idea. But that chapter's yet to be written. The idea that we have to do a stop and frisk now is heightened, because if you're talking to somebody, they have a concealed weapon on them, which they can. Is that a concern for them shooting you, or they're having a serious argument, almost a fisticuff fight, and guns haven't come out, or say they did? Who's all got them and who doesn't? So it's, again, I'm a public servant, and I enforce the will of the legislative body, because that's where the citizens come in. All my bosses, you, my boss, went there and said, these are the laws we want. You asked the question, does it heighten or does it make it more difficult? Montana, we assume everybody's got a gun, just especially during hunting season.
Oh, right.
Hunting season, it's something that really doesn't affect how we do our job, because we train for that. We train that everybody does. And we train to be respectful. If they're going to approach to a car, they don't have to feel like they're walking up in a low crawl with a hand on their gun, but you just think, okay, until otherwise noted, they have a gun. And you approach them with respect. Unless they're fighting, then you're going to have to take command and control of that situation. But there's guns in, the bad guys are going to carry guns where good guys won't. Mm-hmm. The argument was, when you want to take guns away, then the good guys won't have them, but the bad guys will. And there's some truth to that. There really is. We see that. But yes, there's a heightened sense of safety and training, but we'll make do.
So when you would do a routine traffic stop, would you ask somebody if they had a weapon?
No.
Is that not legal to ask?
It is legal, but what you see is when you're walking up, right now, if they have a concealed weapons permit, it shows up when you run the license plate, or when you run, when you run the driver's license. But what we're trained to do is look at the area immediately from where they're at. And you can see sometimes in the pockets or anything like that. If they are having nervousness and they're putting hands where you can't see them, then you ask them, please don't do that. Please keep your hands where I can see them. Then you would follow that up with, do you have any weapons in the car you're reaching for? Do you have any weapons close to you? If you do, we're going to have a problem. So oftentimes in Montana, they have weapons in the car. Don't reach for them. Don't do that. Oftentimes someone will volunteer. They have a weapon in the glove box. Mm-hmm. That's good to know, because you're asking for registration, and they're going to open it up, the gun falls out. That's when mine, probably the second that started to appear, mine's coming out of the holster, because I don't know that just, in a matter of moments is going to come out in my direction. We generally don't have that problem now. Montana has entered into a system where we get when you get insurance and your registration will come out, and we can tell that without having to ask you to reach around and get that. Sometimes people still will do that because the dispatch center won't have all of the latest information. So that's the training part. That's where we have to continually train and not violate anybody's rights. You know,
Yeah.
you can have a weapon in there. But if we can't see your hands, or if it's dark inside the car, we're going to have a index of suspicion that there is something that may harm us. But you can't treat somebody like, you can't treat them all the same like they do have a weapon. You have to be courteous, but ready in case there is.
Yeah.
So I think we're doing a good job with that. A lot of things that get you out of trouble are your mouth. You know, just treating somebody with respect, whether they agree with you or not. They can be sitting there reading your pedigree, and if you can keep yourself from reacting to that, you're in a better place.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that all my experiences, I haven't been pulled over that much, but when I
gotta
have,
get a description of your car. What was that again?
I haven't been asked for weapons or anything, but
We don't unless you're messing around.
yeah. Well, I wanted to move on to something that is alarming in our country, and that is the gun violence and mass shootings. And so in conversations with my friends about mass shootings, I know that in the schools, school children are doing, scenarios as
Yes.
to how to react. But we as the public, what do we do if we find ourselves in a mass shooting event?
That is a good question. As we spoke earlier, we train that the training we provide is called an alert training, and we've worked out with many of our partners in the law enforcement community, other peace officers that go out and train with this, called the run, lock, and fight. So first thing in a mass shooting, if you're not trained or you're not prepared or you're concerned that you have your family there, you may decide the best thing for you to do is run and get out of there. But don't provide a target where you have to run across a big open field to get someplace. You're an open target with your back to the person. Remember that the person who's shooting, my opinion, is a coward. And they are taking advantage of soft targets, what they consider soft targets. Now, some people believe that, and it's proven positive in some places, that if there's other people there with guns, that shooter or shooters will be immediately eliminated. But if you don't have a gun and you don't want to engage, get out of there, run. Find a safe spot. Even if you're in Costco, there are places that you can go. What the shooter's probably thinking of is there's one exit. But there are multiple exits in Costco or other stores. So think about, it's almost like an airline briefing. What is the exit nearest you? You know, don't all run for that front door, because that's like shooting fish in a barrel. And that's where they would probably concentrate. There's other fire exits in Costco. Well, I'm just using Costco because it's a huge building.
Yeah.
And it brings up a great thought about that. It really does. Because if you're going to run and lock yourself inside a cooler, one, that's full of glass, so the person can see you. Second, you time limited yourself how you can stay warm. If you're dressed for shorts and a t-shirt, you're going to be freezing. Although the shooter is generally, they last about a minute or two. But if they're walking around the store looking for targets, you're going to be one of them if they see you in there. So find a room that you can lock. Get out of the store if possible. Don't go to that front door, because that's going to be where everybody panics and runs to. You're right. We do need some education of what happens if we have some individual, some coward that decides that they're going to shoot it up in a store, and how to best engage that. You have some heroic people that throw a can of beans at them, hit them in the head, and take them on. That's an individual choice. Remember, you're taking a can of beans to a gunfight. But if you have the right training, some empty hand control technique, you might be able to do it. But evaluate what you're doing. Again, I'm going to go back to most people are not armed, so run. Find a place you can lock, but get out of the building. Don't go to that front door. Don't go to where people are expecting you to go. They might have a second shooter that's waiting out there. I'm just talking about worst case scenario because that's what we've talked about. I mean, even the Aurora, Colorado shooting in a movie theater, what did they do? The suspect was, well, the convicted individual waited till they were shooting in the movie. I was there at that, afterwards I went to the movie theater. Was all shut down. It was eerie. Anyway, he started shooting when they were shooting in the movie.
Oh, so people didn't know.
Yep, there was, the boom, 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 and it was until somebody was all bloody all over you. So it took a while for the panic to set in because they didn't know. They had a shift change close by with a bunch of Aurora, Colorado, and Denver PD, things like that. So they got there fairly soon, but that individual was all dressed up in SWAT clothes. So he waited long enough where people that were coming in for reinforcements might have been dressed the same. But because there were officers that paid particular close attention to the dress, they spotted him. And of course he gave up. He's a coward. He gave up. He was dressed in body armor, the whole thing. There were several mistakes he made. We won't talk about those because we want people like that back to Costco, back to how a citizen would react. So you're going to react in one or two ways. One, you're going to fight or you're going to flight. If you don't have any training, get out of there. Just get out of there. If you have training and you are used to looking at situational awareness, what if there are two or three of you that have guns going after the shooter? We're trained to go to the sound of gunfire. So we're going to wherever that gunfire is because we're passing up people who need medical care. The first people there, we're going right there to stop that shooter. And there may not be much advice given. We need to stop that. So what if you're the one engaged in a gun battle with the bad guy? We don't know who's who. That's the hard part. We're thankful that you're trying to pin them down, but we need to have these conversations. If people see these amazing stories about one shot, one kill, that the suspect went down and hundreds of people were saved. What if you're in a gun battle and we come in? So the best thing to do is if we say, stop, get down, that's your only warning you're going to get. If you turn and bring that weapon in our direction, it's done, it's over. Even though you weren't the bad guy. We don't know. So civilians have to face that same thing. What training do they have? When you engage in the battle, and you may know exactly who it is, and you may do the heroic thing, and good for you, and we'll celebrate it. But if there's more than one of you, then how do you tell who's who? Generally by the person firing, that's how you tell. But if they're quit firing and they're moving about, just remember, people with guns, when we're coming, we're taking the appropriate action so no one else dies and we don't die.
So if you're in a movie theater or in a church where usually in a movie theater there are side exits.
Yes.
Not sometimes in a church, it's only the rear exit. Do you hide? Do you try to get down and hide?
Yes. Yep.
Rather than flee and lock.
Yeah. And it depends on how scared you are. It's a terrible joke. I apologize ahead of time, but sometimes you have to hide in your own pew.
Yeah.
So, get down. We're looking for targets when we come in, and that's the target means it's somebody who's inflicting the damage. That's what we're looking for. A lot of churches do have side exits because of fire codes and things like that, instead of just having one exit. But get to know where those exits are.
Yeah.
But you're right, some of those exits are not easily known. In a panic situation, you're going to go with what you did last. That's probably the door you came in last, and depending on where the suspect is, you might just have to get down. If you can't make it to an exit, just get down on the floor. And I got to tell you, that would be where you hope somebody in your congregation brought a gun to church, because we're not going to make it there in time.
Yeah.
We're not going to. It's going to be over in 30 seconds. They're going to run out of bullets unless they brought a whole bunch. Just you think of anywhere in town, even if you had a peace officer walking the beat, it's just not possible.
Yeah.
So some of this is citizens, this is our country, and we don't want to get shot in the hind end when we're walking down the street or things like that. So we have to have these conversations that you're asking me now of how can I mean, I'm a business owner. I want people to come into my store, and I don't want to get them shot in the butt coming in. You know, what kind of things can we do to make sure that people are safe? And we need to have you have both sides, but we have to come to the middle to where we say, okay, all right, okay. That's why I appreciate you asking me those questions.
Oh, I'm glad. So do you feel that as a community that we need to have some like educational presentations on how to deal with this? Because like you said, panic.
Yes.
Definitely I would panic. I'd
Sure.
be scared out of my mind.
Yeah.
But I know from my medical training that if I've rehearsed it,
Right.
I'll
Yes.
do what I've rehearsed,
Yes.
even though I'm scared out
Sure.
of my mind.
Yes. I agree with you. I think there's got to be some greater conversations about what to do in a mass shooting, what to do if, I mean, there'll be some that say, well, I'm carrying and I'll end it. Okay, fine, but what if you're not there? So let's talk about if you're not armed. Let's talk about worst case scenario and then building up from there. So I agree that there needs to be some community conversations. You know, I think we have to come to grips with this person has a gun. We can't, I don't feel we can be abolitionists and say, okay, well, let's just take all guns away, because that won't work, because crooks have guns. When you do that, honest people don't have them. Crooks are still going to have them. I mean, look at Detroit, you know, the strictest gun law, New York City, strictest gun laws, and look what just happened over the weekend
Yeah.
with the little girl getting shot. I mean, they have the strictest gun control anywhere. But people who have criminal minds don't care. Mm-hmm. They really don't. So there's got to be a pendulum that comes in the middle. It can't, you know, mash out the clock going one side. But I understand your concern, and I appreciate it, because it brings up a conversation of, well, you know, you don't necessarily agree with everybody carrying a weapon, and that's your right, and that is to be respected. So what should we do? I agree with some of the conversations about, okay, here's what you can do if something like that were to happen. Here's what, you know, the run, lock, fight. That's a plan, not the plan, but a plan. What are things you can do?
So, as a community, should we ask our city commissioners or our county commissioners to sponsor some kind of awareness training? Like even, you know, just awareness that when you walk into a building, you should look at where the exits are.
Yeah.
I mean, I've started doing that just with this increase in mass shootings, and I don't know, it kind of feels to me like there's been an increase in mass shootings.
I've noticed.
Really
I
know.
think there's a cyclic type of. I noticed they went down for a while. Now they're coming back up. I agree. I think if we asked you know, they're the ones with the purse strings. Mm-hmm. So I think your approach is correct to say, hey, county commission, city commission, let's put some funding toward these meetings, and with the understanding of, okay, we're not going there to say, you know, ban all guns, or we're not going there to say, well, we're dishing out guns to everybody. We're going to talk about what happens if these bad things happen. We're going to talk about if you have a gun. We're going to talk about if you don't have a gun. Example for if you have a gun. Probably, it's been 5 years ago, down in Las Vegas. There was a pair that were just completely irrational.
Was this at the concert?
No, that's a different one.
Oh.
That's Mandalay Bay.
Oh, okay.
That's another show to talk about that one. Got a great briefing on that. But this was a couple who showed up at the Bundy standoff north of Las Vegas, and they were so radical that the people who were having the armed standoff with the BLM, they kicked them out. Said, you're too radical. Okay, now understand who just kicked them out.
Yeah.
Those people kicked them out and said, you're too radical. So they were dressed in, the Joker, kind of off of that movie of the Batman. They go to Vegas. They're going to kill officers. That's what they want to do. They're going to start a revolution. They walk into Walmart, going to do a mass shooting. And the guy, there's a man and a wife. The man pulls out his handgun, starts shooting at people. A guy with a concealed weapon permit sees it and goes to engage the shooter and does engage. What he doesn't see is the woman. The woman come along and shot him. So you can have all the good intentions in the world, but if what we call tunnel vision, if you tunnel vision in on the threat and you don't keep your situational awareness, you could easily become the target of a second shooter. Not that often do they just come with one. Mandalay Bay with just one. That was a total bizarre one. There was some heroic efforts that came out of that. There was a crime scene that was 1.5 miles long. There were policemen and firemen who had trained together to respond to something like that. So in answer to your question, not only does the community need to know, we need to start, we being the public safety agencies, we have begun to train together under fire. And it's unfortunate that we have to do that, but that's where we are.
So there's probably really no way to predict somebody's going to go off the rails with a gun.
No, there's no way to predict a drunk driver. I mean, there's probabilities. Some people like to blame mental health issues. I don't like to go down that because I don't like to go down the mental health path. And here's why. If you have somebody who is suffering from mental health issues, severe depression, or even mood swings, things like that, if you all of a sudden say, well, there's a shooter, maybe not. But if you do that, then you get people who won't come into treatment. They won't call and say, I'm having trouble, I need help. They'll lie to their friends, they'll lie to everybody, all of those things. And that's why red flag laws I'm not really keen on. It's going to have unintended consequences of like, I was pissed off that day, but I'm fine now. Yeah. Well, there's due process that got taken away and off you go. It'll create a pushback that we don't want. I think there's a logical way to approach these kind of things. Some people do have a mental health issue, but not all of them. I mean, some of them are just bad people, and no one wants to admit that. I mean, for me, just for my own, I know God loves them all. I may not, but my job is to make sure that they're treated fairly. And my job is to prevent violence if we can. So as long as it doesn't cross the threshold of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And that's what's the hold on me. But that's why I bring up the mental health issue. Yes, those questions are asked on a background when you go in from a licensed dealer. Have you ever been treated for a mental health issue? That's a flag that will hold up getting your license. There are people that have walked in and lied on that form and off they go. And not generally, there's a few that have committed suicide with that weapon. Yeah. That's what we've experienced. The hard part is sometimes we try to come up with a one-size-fits-all. And I don't think that's the solution. I think each community, each state is going to need to look at what their culture is. Mm-hmm. I think that oftentimes we look at what works for Montana, certainly doesn't even touch California. California is different all of its own, or New Jersey, or anything. And I know that people are looking for federal help, but maybe we need to step back and say, okay, if we're going to start someplace and talk about reasonable and rational things that we can do. Just, Valerie, just like what you suggested, I think you're right on path here, right on point of, okay, county commissioners, city commissioners, we want to address this in our community. We want to address this in Lewis and Clark County, and we'd like a opportunity to talk about it. So rather than, I think when you get up to the federal level, there's just nothing that happens fast there.
Right.
But I think locally, like me, I'm responsive to all my bosses that live here. I've got to talk. I don't make the laws. Nobody elected me king. And that's a hallelujah moment, by the way. I'm thankful for that, because there's some really difficult things that come along with this job. And, you know, there's some things I may not like, and there's some things I may. But nonetheless, the real thing I have is a trust of the public that I will listen. That's the key, the way our government was written, is that the local elected people are the closest to you.
Well, you've answered most of my questions. So we're kind of out of time now, but thank you
Okay.
so much.
Thank you.
I think
Good
I will
job.
call the county commissioners
Okay.
and suggest that we at least educate ourselves on
Yeah.
how to react.
I'd be happy to be part of it. They would have to fund it, and we'd be happy to be a part of it.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
So thank you, Sheriff Leo Dutton.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And that's it for everybody's business.